The candle had burned down to nothing. Nellie noticed that first. The small blackened stub in the iron holder beside the servant's door, still faintly smoking, as if it had only just surrendered. She should have replaced it hours ago. She should have done a great many things hours ago, but her legs had stopped obeying her somewhere between the east corridor and the linen storage, and she had found herself sitting on the cold stone floor with her back against the wall and her eyes closed, just for a moment, just until the trembling in her hands subsided. That had been before midnight. The castle of Velmora was never fully silent, but at this hour it came close. The great halls exhaled cold air through their high-vaulted ceilings, and the torches in the corridor brackets had been reduced to embers by the night guards who passed every second hour. Nellie had heard them twice. She had not moved either time. Her body had made a decision her mind refused to acknowledge. It was done. At least for tonight. She was 23 years old and had been a maid in the royal household for 6 of those years. She had started as a laundry girl, hauling wet linen up 4 flights of stairs before most of the castle had opened its eyes. Now she was assigned to the upper residential wing, a promotion that carried no additional pay and considerably more danger, given that the upper wing belonged to him. King Tristan of Velmora, AlphaKing, the only unmated ruler in the known territories. The man who had, in the past 4 years, refused every noblewoman presented to him during the great seasonal councils. The man whose name alone caused serving girls to lower their voices and guards to straighten their spines. Nellie had seen him exactly 3 times at close range. Each time she had pressed herself against the nearest wall and made herself invisible. It was not difficult. Omega servants were practiced in the art of disappearing. She finally pushed herself up from the floor. Her knees ached. Her lower back had stiffened from the cold stone. She gathered the bundle of fresh linens she had dropped when her body gave out and began moving again through the corridor. The task had seemed simple enough when the head housekeeper, Mistress Bora, had assigned it. The king's private sitting chamber was to receive fresh linens, the heavy woolen ones, used when the nights turned bitterly cold, and the small adjoining chamber was to be prepared for a visiting royal advisor arriving the following morning. Mistress Bora had been specific. The adjoining chamber, the one with the narrow window facing east. Not the king's rooms. Never the king's rooms without direct instruction. Nellie knew the difference. She had cleaned the adjoining chamber before, or so she believed. The truth was that she had only been assigned to the upper east wing twice before, and both times under the supervision of an older maid named Petra, who had quit her position 3 weeks prior to marry a blacksmith in the lower town. Without Petra, Nellie had only her own uncertain memory of which door was which. The east corridor had 4 doors. She counted from the stairwell. 1, 2, 3. The third door, she was almost certain. She pressed it open quietly, slipped inside, set the linens on the chest near the entrance, and began to work in the darkness, relying on the pale thread of moonlight coming through a window that was, she noticed absently, considerably larger than she remembered. She made the bed. She smoothed the coverlet. She folded the extra blanket at the foot. Her hands moved without thought, the rhythm of the work carrying her forward, even as exhaustion thickened behind her eyes. When she finished, she stood back. The room was very still, very warm, she realized, warmer than it had any right to be, with coals still burning low in the hearth. She had not lit those coals. The realization arrived slowly, like water seeping under a door. Someone had already prepared this room. Someone had already made this fire. Nellie turned toward the door. Her foot caught the edge of the trunk at the foot of the bed. Not the small servant's chest she had set her linens on, but a massive carved piece she had not noticed in the dark. And she stumbled sideways. Her hand caught the bedpost. Her knees hit the mattress. And then, because her body had already decided this twice tonight, she was horizontal, face half buried in a pillow that smelled of cedar wood and something else, something sharp and clean that did not belong in any servant's chamber she had ever cleaned. She told herself she would rise in a moment. Just one moment. She did not rise. She dreamed of her brother. Edwin had been 8 when she last saw him. A small, serious boy with ink on his fingers and the habit of repeating questions twice when he was anxious. He had been given over to a northern lord as a ward when their father died and left nothing but debt and a leaking roof. Nellie had been 17. She had not fought hard enough. That was the truth she carried like a splinter under her skin. She had not fought hard enough. In the dream, he was still 8. He was standing at the edge of a dark forest, calling her name, and she could not reach him no matter how fast she ran. She woke to the sound of a door, not the soft sound of a servant's careful entrance, the decisive, unhurried push of someone who belonged in this space completely. The door swung open, and the corridor's torchlight fell across the room in a wide angle, and Nellie's eyes opened to find herself staring at a coffered ceiling she had never seen before. She sat up. He was already still. King Tristan stood in the doorway with one hand resting on the frame, wearing a dark riding coat over a gray linen shirt, his hair slightly windswept from what must have been a late return from somewhere beyond the castle walls. He was taller than she remembered from her 3 sideways glimpses. His eyes were a pale, cold gray in the torchlight, and they were fixed on her with an expression that was not anger, which was somehow worse. Anger she could have understood. This was something quieter, something that assessed without rushing. Nellie scrambled backward on the bed, her heel caught in the coverlet. She nearly went off the far edge before catching herself on the post. Her voice came out as barely sound. She cleared her throat, heart crashing. Your Majesty, I beg your... I did not know. The door. I counted wrong. I thought this was... Stop. His voice was low, not sharp, just certain, the way a stone wall was certain. You are one of the servants. It was not a question, but she answered as if it were. Yes, upper east wing. Linens. I was... Mistress Bora sent me for the adjoining chamber, the advisor's room. I counted wrong in the dark. I did not light the fire. I would never... You were asleep. Another non-question. Her face burned. Yes, Your Majesty. I apologize. I will leave immediately. She slid off the bed, bare feet landing on cold stone. She had not even noticed losing her shoes, and reached for the bundle of linens she had brought, which were now hopelessly tangled with the coverlet she had apparently been lying under. He had not moved from the doorway. She became aware, suddenly and acutely, that she was an Omega maid who had fallen asleep in the AlphaKing's bed, that there was a law, not written down anywhere, but understood by every person in the castle, that Omega servants did not enter the king's private quarters without explicit authorization, that her presence here, alone, at this hour, in this bed, was the kind of thing that ended positions, the kind of thing that ended considerably more than positions, depending on a lord's temperament. She finally got the linen bundle free. She clutched it to her chest like a shield. I will tell Mistress Bora myself, Your Majesty. I will not ask for mercy. I only ask... She stopped. She had been about to say, I only ask that you do not send me to the lower cells, and the humiliation of saying it out loud locked the words in her throat. He stepped fully into the room and closed the door behind him. Not quickly, not threateningly. Simply, as if the matter of what to do with her had already been decided, and the decision was a calm one. Sit down, he said. You are white as chalk. Nellie did not sit down. I should leave, Your Majesty. You will fall, he said, with the tone of someone stating a fact about weather, before you reach the stairwell. He moved to the hearth and added 2 pieces of wood from the basket beside it, not looking at her. Sit. I am not going to punish you for falling asleep in the wrong room. She sat, not because she fully believed him, but because her legs had made the decision independently, and the chair was right there. In the firelight, she could see the room properly for the first time. It was nothing like the adjoining chamber she had cleaned twice with Petra. The ceiling was higher. The furniture was heavier, darker wood. On the writing desk sat a half-finished letter. A map weighted at its corners by 2 iron discs, and a candle that had clearly been burning for hours. On the hook behind the door hung a sword belt. This was not a guest chamber. This had never been a guest chamber. The king settled into the chair across from her, still in his riding coat, and looked at her with that same level quiet. "What is your name?" She blinked. "Nellie, Your Majesty." "How long have you been in this castle, Nellie?" 6 years. He said nothing for a moment, just looked at her in a way that made her feel, strangely and uncomfortably, as though she were being read. Not assessed for punishment. Just read. "You will sleep in the adjoining chamber tonight," he said finally. "It is late, and the east corridor is dark enough that you will count wrong again. In the morning, Mistress Bora will hear only that the advisor's room was prepared correctly." He stood, moved toward the desk, and sat down before the map as if she were already gone. "You may leave." Nellie stood. She hesitated at the door with her bundle of linens and her missing shoes and her completely overturned understanding of what kind of man ruled this castle. "Your Majesty," she said quietly. "Why?" He did not look up from the map, but something in his shoulders shifted, barely, a fraction of a degree, before he answered. "Because," he said, "you counted the doors wrong. That is not a crime." She left before she could say anything else. But in the corridor, with the cold stone under her bare feet and her heart still loud in her chest, she thought about the way he had added wood to the fire without being asked, without hesitation, as if keeping a frightened maid warm in the wrong room was simply the reasonable thing to do. It was the smallest act of care she had received in 6 years. It terrified her more than his silence. The morning arrived with frost on the narrow window and the distant sound of the castle waking. Horses in the lower courtyard, the clang of the kitchen bell, the shuffle of boots on stone corridors. Nellie had slept perhaps 3 hours in the advisor's chamber, which was indeed the 4th door, not the 3rd, and had woken before the first bell with a clarity that comes only from the kind of sleep that is too short to allow dreams. She dressed quickly in the cold, smoothed the narrow bed she had barely used, and was back in the east corridor with her linen bundle before any other servant appeared on that floor. If anyone noticed she had spent the night in the upper wing, they said nothing. The castle had a long tradition of not noticing things that were inconvenient to notice. Mistress Bora was waiting in the linen hall with her usual expression, a look that suggested she had personally witnessed the fall of better kingdoms and found them all equally disappointing. "The advisor's chamber?" she asked without greeting. "Prepared, mistress. Coverlet, woolen blanket, fire laid." Bora examined her for a moment with narrow eyes. "You look like you slept on stone." "The walk back was cold," Nellie said. Another pause. Then Bora handed her a folded list of morning tasks and turned away, which was as close to absolution as the woman ever offered. Nellie spent the morning doing what she always did, moving through the castle's upper floors with a wooden pail and a cloth and the practiced silence of someone who had learned very early that invisibility was its own form of safety. She cleaned ash from the hearths in the council antechamber. She replaced the tallow candles in the corridor brackets. She carried a pile of folded woolen cloaks to the guardsman's wardrobe and received no acknowledgement from the 2 guards standing post there, which was expected and fine. She did not think about the king's room. She told herself this firmly each time the thought surfaced, and then she wrung out her cloth and moved to the next task. What she thought about instead was the letter that had arrived 4 days ago, tucked into her hand by a market messenger, when she had gone to the lower town to collect herbs for the head curandera. The letter had no seal. The handwriting was cramped and slanted left. the way Edwin had always written when he was trying to fit too many words into too small a space. Sister, I am not well. Lord Cawdon's house is cold, and there is less food than before. I am 12 now, and he says I must begin training as a page, but I do not want to. I want to come home. I know there is no home. I just wanted to say it. Please write if you can. Please. She had read it 11 times. She had no paper to write back. Paper in the castle belonged to the scribes and the stewards and the nobility, and Omega servants did not ask for it without cause. She had thought about approaching the head steward, Lord Fen, but Fen had a particular talent for making Omega requests vanish into administrative silence, and she had learned the cost of trying. Edwin was at Lord Cawdon's holding, 2 days' ride north. He had been there for 5 years. He was 12 and cold, and did not want to be a page, and there was nothing she could do about any of it from this castle with her wooden pail, and her cloth, and her list of morning tasks. This was the splinter. This was the thing that had exhausted her so completely the night before that she had lost her shoes, and her count, and her dignity in equal measure. She was on her knees cleaning the base of a corridor pillar, when she heard his voice. Not raised. It never was. But it carried. The particular quality of a voice accustomed to being listened to, moving through the stone corridor from the direction of the council chamber. She recognized it immediately, and was on her feet, and pressing into the alcove behind the pillar, before she consciously decided to move. 2 sets of footsteps, the king and someone else, an older man's tread, heavier, slower. The Eastern Holdings continued to petition for lower grain tribute, the other man was saying. He had the smooth, unhurried voice of a senior advisor. Lord Renwick, she thought, the head of the King's Council. Lord Cawdon's petition in particular is poorly worded but pointed. He claims his ward population has increased without proportional resource support from the Crown. A pause. Footsteps continuing past her alcove without slowing. Cawdon has had the same ward allocation for 6 years, the king said. If his population has increased, the petition should go to the Northern Lord Assessor, not the Crown Tribute Office. It was incorrectly routed, yes. But the ward conditions themselves. What are the conditions? Another pause. Overcrowded, from what the assessor's last report indicated. Undersupplied. Some wards have been kept past the standard age without transition documentation. The system is imperfect. It is more than imperfect. The king's voice had not changed in temperature, but something in it had shifted. A new quality, precise and dissatisfied. Pull Cawdon's full ward record. I want it before the week's end. Your Majesty, there are 12 other petitions. Cawdon's first, then the others. The footsteps faded around the corner. Nellie remained in the alcove for a long moment, her cloth still in her hand, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. Cawdon. He had said Cawdon's name. He had asked about the ward conditions. He had said more than imperfect in the tone of someone who intended to do something about it. She told herself it meant nothing specific. Cawdon held dozens of wards. Edwin was only one of them. She told herself this very firmly and went back to the pillar. 3 days passed. She did not see the king. This was normal. The upper east wing required attention every morning, but the king's private chambers were cleaned only by the 2 senior maids, Hesta and Dova, who had held the assignment for years and guarded it with the quiet ferocity of women who understood the value of proximity to power. Nellie's route kept her in the antechambers, the corridors, the council rooms when they were empty. On the 4th day, Mistress Bora reassigned her. Hesta is unwell, Bora said, with no additional context. You will cover her route until she recovers. Upper East Wing, full circuit. Start with the king's sitting room. Nellie kept her expression neutral. Yes, mistress. The sitting room was adjacent to the bedchamber she had stumbled into. It was large and severe. No decorative excess, no softness for softness's sake. Maps on every surface. Bookshelves without ornament. A long table with chairs for perhaps 8 people. A single tapestry on the far wall depicting a wolf in a winter forest, rendered in gray and dark blue thread. Its eyes caught mid-motion as if interrupted. She was cleaning the ash from the hearth when the door to the inner corridor opened and he was there. He stopped when he saw her. She stood, cloth in hand, ash on her sleeve. "Nellie," he said. Just her name, as if he had kept it somewhere and retrieved it without difficulty. "Mistress Hesta is unwell, Your Majesty. I am covering her route." She paused. "I know the 3rd door from the stairwell now. I counted this morning." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. The suggestion of one, quickly contained. "I am not concerned about the door," he said. He moved to the long table and picked up a document from the nearest stack, scanning it in the way of someone who had come to retrieve a specific thing. "Continue your work." She turned back to the hearth. Her hands moved. The silence in the room was not uncomfortable in the way silences in powerful men's rooms usually were. The kind of silence that pressed and waited to become accusation. This was a different kind. Occupied. A silence with work in it. "The ward record," he said behind her. Not to her, or not obviously to her, as if thinking aloud. "Cawdon's Northern Holding. 12 wards currently listed, 3 past transition age. No documentation filed." A pause. Negligent or deliberate. Nellie's hand stilled. She did not turn around. "It is a question," he said. She heard him set the document down. "Not one I expect an answer to." She turned anyway. He was looking at her with that same reading quality she had noticed the night she had no shoes. Not demanding. Simply open, in the way of someone genuinely curious about what the other person might say. She should have said nothing. She should have nodded and turned back to the ash. "Edwin," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "He is 12. He has been with Cawdon since he was 7. He wrote to me 4 days ago. He says the house is cold, and they are training him for a page position he did not agree to." The king was very still. "He is my brother," she said. "He is one of Cawdon's wards, Your Majesty." The last 2 words arrived slightly late, an afterthought she added not out of fear, but out of the mechanical habit of 6 years. She watched him absorb what she had said. Watched him not dismiss it. "Your brother's full name," he said. "Edwin. Edwin Marsh. His ward papers were filed by Lord Cawdon's steward in the year of the Frost Council. Our father owed Cawdon a debt. When he died, Edwin was taken as settlement." Something in his expression tightened. It was not visible in any obvious way. No jaw set, no eye narrowed. It was subtler than that. A quality of contained response, the way a fire burns hotter without changing its shape. "A child was taken as debt settlement," he said. "Yes, Your Majesty. Against his will. He was 7. He did not know enough to have a will about it yet." The king looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the document in his hand, and then back at her. And she saw, clearly, unmistakably, the moment the 2 things connected in his mind. "Return to your work," he said. She turned back to the hearth, but the silence in the room had changed again. It had a different weight now, less occupied and more deliberate, as if the space between them were being quietly reorganized around a decision not yet spoken. She finished the ash, replaced the iron grate, and was gathering her pail when his voice came again from behind her. "Marsh." He said her family name with the same precision he had used on Cawdon's. "Memorizing it. Filing it somewhere." "I have it." She did not ask what he meant. She understood that he was not offering comfort or promise. He was simply telling her that the name was now inside the same system he had just said was more than imperfect, and that he intended to make it less so. She walked out of the sitting room and down the east corridor, counting doors carefully, and stood at the top of the stairwell for a moment with her pail and her cloth, and something in her chest she could not quite name. Something that was not hope yet, because hope was a luxury she had learned not to carry. But it was adjacent to hope, close enough to make her careful. She went downstairs. She went back to work. But her hands had stopped trembling for the first time in 4 days. The summons came on a Tuesday. Nellie knew it was Tuesday because the kitchen always served barley soup on Tuesdays, and she had been carrying a bowl of it back to the servants' hall when the younger steward, a thin boy named Pip, appeared at the corridor junction with the particular expression of someone delivering news he did not fully understand. "Mistress Bora wants you," he said. "Council anteroom, now." She left the soup on the nearest ledge and followed him. Mistress Bora was standing outside the anteroom door with her hands folded, and her expression arranged into something that was not quite worry, but was adjacent to it, the look of a woman who had received information above her authority to interpret. Beside her stood Lord Renwick, the senior advisor whose voice Nellie had recognized in the corridor days before. He was a tall man, white-haired, with the careful stillness of someone who had spent decades watching other people reveal themselves. "Nellie Marsh?" he said. Not a question. "Yes, my lord." "The king requires your presence. You are not in any trouble." He paused, then added, with what she suspected was uncharacteristic clarity, "I am telling you this because in my experience, when servants are told they are not in trouble, they assume the opposite. You are genuinely not in trouble. Come." Mistress Bora gave her a look that communicated a great many things in very little time. Be careful, be quiet, do not embarrass this household. And then Renwick was already moving, and Nellie had no choice but to follow. The council chamber was smaller than she had imagined from cleaning its antechambers. A long oak table, 8 chairs, maps on the walls. She recognized the style from the sitting room. At the far end of the table, 2 men sat with open ledgers between them. One was a scribe, the other was the king. He did not look up when she entered, but she had the immediate sense that he was aware of her, the way a person is aware of a door opening in a room they are already occupying. "Sit," Renwick said, guiding her to a chair across the table. She sat. The king closed his ledger. He looked at her with the same level regard she was becoming, against her will, familiar with. "I reviewed Cawdon's ward records," he said. "All 12. 3 are past the legal transition age with no documentation. 2 more have no educational provision listed despite the Crown's ward charter requiring it. Your brother is among those 5. Nellie kept her hands flat on her thighs beneath the table. "Yes, Your Majesty. Cawdon will receive a formal correction notice from the Crown Assessor. He has 30 days to file transition documents for the 3 eldest wards, including Edwin, or face a tribunal." He paused. "Transition means release from wardship. Your brother would become legally independent. He could, at that point, pursue work, apprenticeship, or, if you wished, join you here in the castle household." The scribe was writing. The scratch of the quill was very loud. Nellie said carefully, "Why are you telling me this yourself?" Renwick shifted slightly in his chair. The king did not shift at all. "Because you told me his name," he said, "and because you deserve to know what would be done with it." She looked at him across the oak table with his maps and his ledgers and his 30-day correction notice that was, to the administrative apparatus of a kingdom, a very small thing, a routine compliance action, 1 file among hundreds. And she understood that he had not needed to tell her. He could have filed it, corrected it, moved to the next petition, and she would have known nothing until Edwin himself appeared at the gates. He had chosen to tell her. She did not know what to do with that. She filed it away in the same careful place she had put the firewood and the unlocked door, and the sound of her name retrieved without effort. "Thank you," she said. The words were plainly insufficient. She said them anyway. He nodded once and reopened his ledger. "Renwick will ensure you receive written notice when the correction is filed. You may go." She went. But in the corridor outside, with the stone cold under her feet and Renwick's quiet footsteps receding in the other direction, she stopped walking and pressed the back of her hand briefly to her mouth and breathed through the tightness in her chest until it became manageable. She had not cried in the council chamber. She was quite proud of that. 2 weeks later, Hesta recovered and reclaimed her route. Nellie returned to the lower east corridors, the antechambers, the council rooms after hours. The temporary proximity to the upper wing closed as naturally as it had opened, and she told herself this was correct. Proper distance was safe distance. She understood the architecture of her own life well enough to know where the walls were. What she had not accounted for was the wolf. She first saw it on a Thursday night, coming back from the laundry with a basket of dried linen balanced on her hip. She was cutting through the inner garden, a courtyard enclosed on 3 sides by the castle's eastern face, with a stone fountain at its center that had frozen solid in the first hard frost of the season. She preferred the garden route to the main corridor after dark, because it was shorter, and because the guards on the East Gate rotation were less interested in where Omega servants went than the guards on the main hall. The wolf was sitting beside the frozen fountain. She stopped. Every instinct she had, and Omega instincts, while quieter than Alpha or Beta, were not without their own particular acuity, fired simultaneously. The animal was enormous, silver gray in the moonlight, with a breadth of shoulder that did not belong to any common forest wolf, because common forest wolves did not sit calmly in royal courtyards as if they had been expecting someone. It looked at her. Its eyes were pale, cold gray, catching the moonlight. She stood very still with her basket of linen, and her heart making decisions she had not authorized. The wolf did not move. It did not growl. It sat with the same quality of contained stillness she had begun to recognize in a completely different context. And it watched her with what she could only describe, in the privacy of her own mind, as attention. Not hunger, not threat. Attention. She took 1 step backward. The wolf's ears moved, tracking her, but it remained seated. She took another step. It blinked, slowly, in the particular way of large predators that have decided you are not interesting enough to chase, and then it turned its great head toward the garden wall and looked away. She made it to the laundry corridor in 11 seconds. She knew this because she counted. She did not tell anyone. What would she have said? There is a massive silver wolf sitting in the inner garden, calm as a counselor at a dull meeting. The castle guard would have laughed. Mistress Bora would have told her to sleep more. And something else, something she couldn't fully articulate even to herself, made her reluctant to report it. As if doing so would break something that had not yet been named. She saw the wolf again, 5 nights later. This time she was not in the garden, but in the upper corridor near the servants' stairs, and it was not sitting, but moving. A slow, deliberate pace across the far end of the corridor, utterly silent despite its size. It paused at the junction, looked at her, and continued on. The 3rd time, she was sitting on the stone bench in the east garden. During the half-hour break, Mistress Bora permitted between the afternoon and evening routines. She had been trying to compose a letter to Edwin in her head, planning the words she would write when she had access to paper through the Crown's ward notification process. Renwick had promised it, and she believed him. The wolf appeared around the garden corner and settled itself on the frozen ground 6 feet from the bench, as naturally as a hound returning to a familiar spot. Nellie looked at it for a long time. "You are not frightening me on purpose," she said quietly. "I think you are doing the opposite." The wolf's ear rotated toward her. Its expression, insofar as a wolf had one, remained entirely unbothered. "I am not going to pretend I don't know what you are," she said even more quietly. I have lived in this castle for 6 years. I have heard things. What she had heard, in fragments, in the particular way that servants accumulated knowledge, through overheard conversations, through the things people said when they forgot you were present, was this: the king ran at night, that he had been seen in his shifted form in the northern forest, and twice in the upper mountains, that no one who served in the castle had ever seen his wolf at close range, and lived to describe it in embarrassing detail, which meant no one spoke of it at all. The wolf looked at her with pale gray eyes and did not confirm or deny anything. "You could have used the forest," she said. "You don't need to come into the garden." A pause. The wolf's gaze held hers steadily. "Unless," she said, and stopped herself, because the end of that sentence was something she was not ready to say out loud, in a garden, to a wolf that might or might not be the most powerful alpha in the known territories. She stood, picked up her apron, and went back inside. But she came back to the garden the next afternoon, and the one after that. The letter came on a cold morning 12 days later. Renwick delivered it himself, which surprised her, finding her in the corridor with her pail. He handed it to her without ceremony, a folded page with the Crown Assessor's seal, and said only, "Cotton responded inside the deadline. Transition documents filed. Your brother will be free of wardship in 14 days. Nellie held the paper with both hands. "There is also this," Renwick added, and produced a second, smaller note. No seal, no formal heading. Just a few lines in a hand she did not recognize yet. "You may write to him now. Paper will be provided upon request to the head steward. T." She read it twice. Then she folded both letters against her chest and stood in the corridor for a moment with her eyes closed and the cold radiating up through the stone floor and the distant sound of the castle going about its unchanging business around her. T. One letter. As if he had considered signing it fully and decided it was more honest not to. She thought about the garden, about pale gray eyes in the moonlight, about firewood added without ceremony, and names remembered without effort, and a correction notice filed for a 12-year-old boy whom the king of Velmora had never met. She thought about the word mate, a word she had heard used in the castle with the casual reverence of something sacred, something that could not be forced or faked, a word that Omega instinct recognized before the mind was ready to. She pressed the letters flat against her chest and breathed carefully. She was not ready. She knew she was not ready. Too much of her life had been shaped by the absence of people who were supposed to stay, and she had learned, painstakingly, at cost, not to trust warmth that arrived unexpectedly. Warmth that arrived unexpectedly had a way of leaving the same way. But Edwin would be free in 14 days. And in the East Garden, at half-hour break, there would be a wolf that did not need to be there and chose to be anyway. She went to find paper. Edwin arrived on a gray morning, 17 days after the transition documents were filed. Nellie had not been told he was coming that day specifically. The ward release process, as Renwick had explained it, involved a royal escort from Cawdon's Northern holding to the castle. Standard procedure for wards released under Crown correction to ensure the former lord could not obstruct the transition. She had been told within the month. She had been counting days and trying not to. She was in the east courtyard collecting ash buckets from the outer hearths when she heard the gates, the sound of iron on stone, horses slowing, a guard's call. She set down her bucket and walked to the courtyard archway and looked through. He was taller than she remembered. That was the first thing. 12 years old and already reaching toward something. Thin, yes, and pale from a northern winter, with the particular stillness of a child who had learned to be careful around adults. He wore a coat too large for him, probably a hand-me-down from Cawdon's stores, and his dark hair needed cutting, and he had ink on his left hand even now, somehow, even after a 2-day ride. He was looking around the courtyard with wide, serious eyes, and then those eyes found her at the archway, and the stillness broke completely. She crossed the courtyard at something that was not quite running but was the closest she had come to it in 6 years. And then he was there, his too large coat scratchy against her face. And he was shaking. Not crying, just shaking. The way small creatures do when they have been cold for a very long time and finally feel warmth and don't know what to do with it. "I'm here," she said, into the top of his head. "Edwin, I'm here." "I know," he said, muffled. "I can see that." She laughed. It surprised her. She had not laughed in longer than she could immediately calculate. Mistress Bora, who was a more complicated woman than she appeared, arranged a cot for Edwin in the steward's apprentice quarters, a small room off the main servants' hall, shared with 2 other boys his age who worked in the castle records office. It was not warm. It was not large. But it had a door that locked from the inside, which Cawdon's holding apparently had not, and Edwin touched the bolt on his first night with the expression of someone receiving an extraordinary gift. He settled into the castle the way quiet, observant children settle into new places, by watching everything first and revealing nothing until he understood the rules. Within a week, he had identified every servant's name on the eastern floor, memorized the meal schedule, and made a detailed mental inventory of the records office, where he had been tentatively assigned as an apprentice scribe. He had the instincts of someone who had spent 5 years being overlooked and had learned to use it. Nellie watched him and felt something in her chest slowly, carefully begin to unknot. She was in the inner garden on a cold Wednesday afternoon when Tristan came through the eastern archway. Not the wolf. Him. In a gray wool coat over a dark tunic, no crown, no formal markers. The particular informality of a man who had decided for an hour to be in a garden rather than in a council chamber. She had seen this version of him only in brief glimpses before. The purposeful walker, the unhurried reader of maps. Without the formal setting, he seemed simultaneously more human and more difficult to look at directly. He saw her and did not change direction. She stood from the bench. "Your Majesty." "Sit down, Nellie." He said it the same way he said everything, not unkindly, just with the certainty of someone who meant what he said and found repetition unnecessary. She sat. He sat at the other end of the bench, leaving the space between them deliberate and clear. "Your brother arrived," he said. Not a question. He would have known from Renwick's report. 17 days ago, Your Majesty. He is well. He has already reorganized the records office filing system without being asked. Something crossed his face. Genuine, quiet amusement. Renwick mentioned he found an indexing error that had been misfiled for 2 years. "He likes order," she said. "He always did. Even when he was small, he arranged things." A pause settled between them, but it was the occupied kind. Not empty. She had become, over weeks of brief encounters and garden afternoons and letters initialed with a single character, accustomed to his silences. They were not a test. They were simply what happened when a man thought before he spoke. "I want to ask you something," he said. "And I want you to answer honestly, without accounting for what you think I want to hear." She looked at him. "That is what I always do, Your Majesty." "I know," he said. "That is why I'm asking you." He was quiet for a moment. The fountain was still frozen. A crow was doing something investigative near the base of the garden wall. "The council is pressuring me again. The matter of a mate." Nellie kept her hands flat on her knees. 4 years of refusals, he continued. Every noblewoman from the 7 territories. Every arranged meeting. Every formal introduction. The council frames it as political instability. A king without a Luna is a succession question. He looked at the frozen fountain. "They are not wrong about the politics. They are wrong about the solution." She waited. "The wolf knows what it knows," he said carefully. I have not found a way to explain that to a council of men who do not experience it the same way. The crow found what it had been looking for and flew off. The garden was very quiet. You are telling me this, Nellie said slowly, because you want an honest answer to something you have not yet asked. He looked at her then, directly, with the full weight of those pale gray eyes in daylight, which was different from moonlight, and different from torchlight, and somehow more difficult to manage than either. The wolf has been coming to this garden, he said. You know that. Yes. You know why. It was not quite a question. She answered it anyway, because he had asked for honesty, and she had just promised it. I think I do, she said. I am not ready to say it yet. He nodded, as if that answer was exactly correct, and he had expected nothing else. I am not asking you to be ready. I am asking you to know that I am aware of what I am asking. Not as a king making a political decision, but as... He stopped, reconsidered. I want you to understand that I know the difference between what I owe the council and what I choose. Nellie looked at her hands. 6 years of work had marked them. Roughened skin, a scar on her right thumb from a laundry iron 2 winters ago. Not the hands of a woman anyone had ever looked at as a choice. I was an Omega maid who slept in your bed by accident, she said. I counted the wrong door. I know. There are noble women in 7 territories who have been prepared their whole lives for exactly what the council is describing. I know that too. I have nothing, she said. Not with self-pity, just with the flatness of fact. No title, no land, no dowry, no political value. My family was a debt. My brother arrived in a coat that didn't fit him. I know all of this, he said. And then, after a pause that was not empty at all, I also know that you came back to this garden every afternoon for 3 weeks. You didn't have to. Silence. No, she admitted quietly. I didn't. He stood. He did not press further. He did not reach for her hand or say anything that would force her into a corner she was not ready to occupy. He simply straightened his coat, glanced once more at the frozen fountain, and said, There is no deadline, Nellie. The council can wait. He walked back through the archway. She sat on the bench for a long time after he left, in the cold, with her rough hands in her lap, and her heart doing the complicated thing it had been doing for weeks, and she thought about the word choose. How different it was from arrange or require or settle. How rarely she had heard it applied to anything in her life. The trouble arrived 4 days later, in the form of Lord Cawdon himself. He came to the castle under the pretense of a routine Northern Lords' Council visit, the kind that required no special invitation and raised no immediate alarm. He was a broad man in his 50s with a red face and the particular confidence of someone who had spent decades being the most powerful person in every room he entered. He arrived with 6 attendants, a cart of tribute goods, and an expression that had not yet decided whether to be pleasant or threatening. Nellie learned of his arrival through Edwin, who appeared in the east corridor during her morning tasks with the tight, careful face he wore when he was frightened and trying not to show it. He's here, Edwin said quietly. She set down her pail. I know. Stay in the records office today. Do not give him a reason to see you. He asked the gate guard who the ward boy was, the one released under Crown correction. Edwin's hands were still at his sides, very controlled. The guard told him I was a scribe apprentice. Good. That is what you are. Nellie. He looked at her with 12-year-old eyes that had seen enough to be older. He is not here for tribute. She knew. She had known from the moment she heard the name. Cawdon had 30 wards and 5 years of unchallenged practice, and a correction filed against him by the Crown, which meant he had a grievance and a target, and enough political presence to make his way into the castle without invitation. She spent the morning working and thinking. She was in the antechamber outside the East Council room, replacing candle stubs, when she heard Cawdon's voice through the door. Loud, well-practiced, shaped for rooms designed to carry authority. The ward was legally mine until the Crown intervened on the basis of a servant's complaint. A servant. I have served this kingdom faithfully for 20 years, and a maid's word is sufficient to file a Crown correction against my household? A pause. Then Renwick's voice, measured. The correction was filed on the basis of the Crown Ward Charter. No individual complaint was necessary. Someone flagged those specific files. Someone with access to the assessor's report. I would like to know who. Another pause. This one longer. That information, said a third voice, level, unhurried, carrying the particular quality of a fire that burns hot without showing flame, is not available to you. Nellie's hand stopped moving. Your Majesty. Cawdon's tone shifted, still loud but recalibrated. I mean no disrespect. I simply wish to understand. You wish to identify who brought the filing to my attention, the king said, so that you can address it outside the correction process. That is what you wish. A long silence. The ward charter exists, the king continued, because wards are not property. Your petition misidentifies the issue. The correction stands. The boy remains here. If you have a formal legal objection, file it with the tribunal office. That is the appropriate mechanism. A brief pause. Lord Renwick will show you out. Nellie pressed herself against the wall beside the door, candle stub still in her hand, and listened to the sound of chairs moving and footsteps approaching. She slipped back around the corridor junction before the door opened. She heard Cawdon's voice one more time as he passed, speaking low to one of his attendants. Find out which maid. Find out everything. The footsteps moved on. Nellie stood at the junction with the cold stone at her back and understood, with a clarity that required no instinct to confirm, that this had shifted. Cawdon was not a careless man. He was a careful man who had been publicly checked, and careful men who had been publicly checked became methodical in their responses. She needed to tell someone. She went to find Renwick. Renwick listened without interrupting, which she had come to understand was his way. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, then said, You heard him clearly. Find out which maid. Yes. Then you are not safe in the public corridors while he is in the castle. He stood. I will speak to the king. I can speak to the king myself, she said. Renwick looked at her with the expression of a man recalibrating something. Then he said simply, Yes. I suppose you can. She found Tristan in the sitting room, at the long table with his maps, exactly where she had first cleaned ash from his hearth, while her hands were still learning not to tremble in his presence. He looked up when she entered. He saw her face, and whatever he had been about to say about maps or councils or tribute petitions did not get said. Cawdon, she said. I know, he said. He was already standing. Sit down. I don't need to sit down. He looked at her for a moment. No, he agreed. You don't. He came around the table, not close enough to crowd her, just present, the specific quality of presence she had come to understand as his particular form of reassurance. He will not find what he is looking for. The filing trail goes through the assessor's office. Your name does not appear. He said, find out everything. Yes. His jaw tightened, fractionally. I heard. Then you know he means Edwin too. Edwin is under Crown apprenticeship now. Cawdon has no legal reach. He paused. But I am going to ask you to move your quarters while he is in the castle. The senior servants' hall, closer to the guarded wing. Renwick will arrange it. She looked at him, at the space between them, at the maps on the table and the tapestry, Wolf on the wall and the half-finished letter on the desk that she had never read and never would. You are keeping us safe, she said. Not an accusation, just recognition. "I am trying to," he said. "You should know, he is not the only one. There will be others who object if—" He stopped. "If things change. If you choose an Omega Maid," she said quietly. "That is what you mean." He held her gaze. "If I choose you, yes, there will be those who object. I want you to know that before, not after." Nellie stood in the sitting room with the firelight moving on the stone walls and the full weight of what was being offered somewhere in the space between them. Not forced, not rushed, not tied to any political machinery, just offered, clearly and honestly, by a man who had learned her brother's name and filed a correction, and sat in a frozen garden at half-hour break, and signed a letter with one letter, because more would have been dishonest. "I know," she said. "And?" he asked. Just that. Just the one word, with all the patience in the world behind it. She looked at him for a long moment. At the pale gray eyes that she had first seen in torchlight, and then moonlight, and then the full, complicated light of a winter afternoon. "And I came back to the garden every day," she said. "You already know why." Something in his face changed. Not dramatically. Quietly. The way light changes in a room when a shutter is finally opened. He did not reach for her. He simply nodded once, and then said, "Then we deal with Cawdon first." "Yes," she agreed. "Then we deal with Cawdon." Cawdon spent 3 days in the castle before the tribunal notice reached him. Renwick had moved efficiently. Within hours of Nellie's report, he had cross-referenced Cawdon's tribute records against the Crown Ward Charter and found what a more careful man would have destroyed. 2 additional wards, unregistered, kept past legal age without documentation or wages. Children held as labor under a classification that did not exist in any Crown record, because Cawdon had invented it himself, quietly, over years of unchallenged practice. The tribunal summons was delivered to Cawdon's guest quarters on the second morning of his visit by 2 members of the Royal Guard, which was not subtle and was not meant to be. Nellie heard about it through Edwin, who heard it through the apprentice scribes, who had been asked to copy the formal documentation, and had done so with the particular enthusiasm of young people witnessing something historic. She did not see Cawdon leave. She was in the senior servants' hall, relocated as Tristan had arranged, closer to the guarded wing, folding linen with hands that had finally, completely, stopped trembling. But she heard the gates, and she heard the horses, and she heard the silence after, which was the particular silence of a threat that had departed without resolving into violence. Edwin appeared in the doorway with ink on both hands now, and his too large coat replaced by a proper apprentice's tunic that fit him correctly. "He's gone," he said. "I know." He came in and sat on the bench beside her, and was quiet for a moment in the way he was quiet when he was processing something large. Then he said, "The other 2 wards, the unregistered ones. Where will they go?" "Crown assessment," she said. "Renwick will see to it." He nodded slowly. Then, "You did that. The filing, the correction. All of it started because you said my name." She looked at him. "You wrote me a letter. You could have done nothing. Most people would have." "I know," she said, "but I had help." Edwin was 12 and observant, and had spent 5 years learning to read rooms accurately. He looked at her with his serious eyes and said nothing more, which meant he had already understood the rest. The formal council session happened on the 4th day after Cawdon's departure. Nellie was not present for it. She learned what occurred through Renwick, who sought her out afterward in the East Garden with the expression of a man who had witnessed something he was still organizing in his mind. The king addressed the council, Renwick said, settling onto the stone bench as if his knees had finally requested it. "The matter of a Luna." Nellie waited. "He was very clear," Renwick continued. "He presented his choice. He explained that the mate bond does not negotiate with political convenience. He said, The old advisor paused, choosing his words. He said that he had spent 4 years refusing women who were excellent in every measurable way, because the wolf knew before the man did, and the wolf had been right. A brief pause. There was significant objection. Lord Fenwick called it an insult to the noble houses. Lord Aldrich suggested a compromise, a formal mating alongside a political alliance. Renwick looked at her. The king declined both positions without raising his voice once. What did the council decide? The council, Renwick said, with the faint tone of a man who had lived long enough to find certain things amusing, decided what councils always decide when the king is immovable. They recorded their objections formally and then proceeded. Nellie looked at the frozen fountain, which had begun, at its edges, to thaw. A thin ring of dark water had appeared around the base of the ice, something loosening, slowly, in the cold. He did not ask me first, she said, not with anger. Just noting it. No, Renwick agreed. But he told me to tell you that if your answer is still uncertain, the council record can be amended. That the objections are already filed regardless, so the political cost exists whether you say yes or no, and therefore your answer should be given without accounting for it. She was quiet for a long moment. He thought of everything, she said. He is annoyingly thorough, Renwick said, with complete sincerity. She found Tristan in the east garden that evening, at the hour when the light went gray, and the torches inside began to glow through the high windows. He was standing at the fountain, the thawing fountain, its ice cracked now through the center, with his coat collar turned up against the cold. He heard her before she reached him. She knew this because he turned before she was close enough to make sound, and she had stopped trying to understand how that worked. She stopped a few feet away. The garden was empty. The crow had not returned. The castle's evening sounds moved around them distantly, separate, as if the garden existed in a slightly different space than the rest of Velmora. Renwick told you, he said. Yes. He looked at her. Patient. Steady. The same way he had been from the beginning, from the moment he had added wood to a fire for a frightened maid who had counted the wrong door and had not made it strange and had not asked for gratitude. You took the political cost, she said, before I gave you an answer. The cost was mine to take, he said. The answer is yours to give. Nellie looked at him, at this man who had filed a correction for a boy he had never met, who had sat in a frozen garden because the wolf had known before the man did, who had faced a council of lords without raising his voice and declined every compromise without hesitation. She thought about the word choose. How different it was from every other word that had shaped her life. I came to this castle at 17, she said. I had nothing. I have spent 6 years being invisible because invisible was safe. She paused. I do not know how to be anything else. I know, he said. I will make mistakes. I do not know the councils or the territories or how to be a Luna. I know linen schedules and ash buckets and how to count doors in the dark. I know that too. I am an Omega. Yes, he said, and the wolf chose correctly. She looked at him for one more moment, at the pale gray eyes she had first seen in torchlight, when she was barefoot and frightened and holding a bundle of misplaced linen, at the man who had, from that moment forward, been nothing but exactly what he appeared to be. Then yes, she said, quietly, completely, without accounting for the cost. Something in his face opened, not dramatically, because he was not a dramatic man. Just genuinely, the way a room opens when the last shutter is unlatched and the light comes through fully for the first time. He reached out and took her hand. Both of them looked at that for a moment, her rough, work-marked hand inside his. And neither of them said anything because nothing needed to be said. Spring came to Velmora in increments, The fountain thawed completely in the first warm week. Edwin finished reorganizing the records office and was commended in writing by the head steward, Lord Fenn, who did not commend anyone in writing unless he was genuinely impressed. He found in the process 4 additional misfiled ward cases, which he brought to Renwick with the careful precision of someone who understood exactly what he was doing and intended to keep doing it. Cawdon's tribunal concluded before the thaw. The 2 unregistered wards were released and placed under Crown assessment. Cawdon's noble standing was formally reduced, not eliminated, because the law moved carefully, but marked. It was enough. The careful men who had watched him go unchallenged for 2 decades recalibrated their assumptions. Nellie was named Luna of Velmora at a council session in early spring, in a ceremony that was shorter than tradition required, and attended by more people than expected. She wore a gown the color of winter fog, and kept her hands still at her sides, and looked at the Council of Lords who had filed their objections, and met each pair of eyes without looking away. Renwick stood at the back of the chamber, and did not attempt to hide that he found the whole proceeding satisfying. Tristan stood beside her, and did not let go of her hand. Afterward, in the east garden, with the fountain running clear, and the first green things pushing through the soil at the base of the wall, Edwin found her on the stone bench. He sat beside her, and looked at the garden with his serious eyes, and his ink-stained hands, and his properly fitting tunic. "Are you happy?" he asked. She considered the question with the honesty it deserved. "Yes," she said. "I think I am." He nodded, as if this confirmed a calculation he had already completed. Then he said, "I found another misfiled case this morning, from 8 years ago. I think there might be more." "Tell Renwick," she said. "I will." He paused. "He says I have a gift for finding what people tried to hide." "You always did," she said. "Even when you were small." He almost smiled. For Edwin, that was equivalent to anyone else laughing. They sat together in the spring garden while the castle moved around them, and the water ran clear in the fountain, and the light came through the eastern windows in long, warm lines across the stone. The wrong door had been the right one all along. She understood that now, not as magic or destiny, but as the simpler, truer thing it had always been. A cold night, a burned-down candle, a frightened girl who counted wrong, and a king who added wood to a fire because it was the reasonable thing to do. Everything else had followed from that. Everything good always had.